So let's learn how arrays work in C# using ASP.NET with an MVC app. I'm going to create a brand new project, file, new project, and we'll do an ASP.NET web, and I'm going to call this one array sample, and we'll leave that framework the same and click OK. We're going to choose an empty MVC application. Click OK, and this will create our structure we need, and then we'll have the ability to go and refine that structure. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and close this window, and I'm not seeing some of my other windows I like to use, so I'm going to click on View, Solution Explorer, and View. Well, we won't need the toolbox for this one. View, and we'll do our, if my screen will come back. Come on back. So sorry about that, it's taking a minute. View and our properties window, and we'll call that good for what we need right now. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a new controller. So I'll right mouse click controller and click add controller, and we want an empty controller. Click add, and we're going to call this controller home controller. Now the reason we're going to do that is because when we run our ASP.NET website, by default it's looking for a home controller. So if you create an ASP.NET website and call it that controller something else, like index controller, when you actually run your website it won't be able to find it. And the reason being is because under app start we have what they call a route config. And that route config says if you ever run this website and you don't type in anything, you just go to the URL. Let's say that I uploaded this web page to a URL called www.thisisfun.com. I have no idea what that is, and I try to run it, and so I don't say anything else. I just say the URL. So there's no parameters with it, no other pathway. It says, hey, here's our default route that looks for a controller, an action, and an ID. And by the way, I didn't give any of that stuff in that URL. I just said www.thisisfun.com. And so it says, well then let's go find a home controller file, which in our case now we have one over here. And let's go find a method inside that home controller called index. And if we look inside of it, there's an index. And so that's the first thing that's going to run if you just type in the default URL. Now if I had done this and changed the word index here and index there, and I ran my website and just typed www.thisisfun.com, it would go try to find an index controller.cs file, which it wouldn't have. And so it wouldn't have access to any methods, and so you're going to get an error. And it would say, I don't know what you're doing. So it's very important to make sure you're naming your controllers correctly. But this is why we're going to go ahead and stick with home controller for now. But we don't have to if we don't want to. So here's our home controller. We now want to work with an array. The first thing I want to do though is I want to create a random number. In C#, the way we do that is we say the word random, and then we give it some name, and then we say equals new, and we call the random constructor. So that variable random now allows us to create random numbers. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array. Now remember, arrays are contiguous memory, so I'm going to specify the data type of the array and that it is an array. That's what the square brackets do. I'll give it a name. I like Hungarian notation, so I'm going to say AI stands for an array of numbers equals, and then array numbers equals new, because we need to instantiate the array, the data type, and how many elements. We'll say it has 5 elements. I can now do anything I want with this array, and I access positions in the array through what we call the index or element number. And in C#, the elements begin at position 0. So I could say AI numbers bracket 0. Go to the very first element of that array, and let's put something in it. And we could say, let's put a random number next, and we'll start between 1 to 13 exclusive, meaning it is not included. So this will be a number between 1 to 12. and we put that in position 1. And I could say AI numbers bracket 1 equals, and do the same thing with this code. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this code, and I'm going to come over here and say position 2, position 3, position 4. Now if you notice, an array in C#, we said it was 5 long, but since it starts at 0, the ending position is 4. And these arrays, this position of the array is just an offset of how far to move from the beginning of the array. So this says go to the array and don't offset anywhere and locate that value and put a new number in it. This says go to the array and then offset the location by 1 position, store a value. 2 positions from where it begins, store a value. 3 positions, and so forth. So that now loads up all the elements in my array. So they each have values. Now what I could do is I could display those values back. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go ahead and use a for loop. I could use a for each, but I'm going to use a for loop. And I'll say int iCount equals 0. And as long as iCount is less than the array dot length, because the array is an object and it has an attribute called length, and that says how many numbers do you have. And in this case, it would return back the number 5. So it would say start at position 0, and as long as that counter is less than 5, stay in the loop. And then I'm going to increment the variable iCount. And then inside the actual loop, I can now access that array by specifying the element position for that array. So what I want to do is I just want to build a Viewbag. I want to work with my Viewbag, which is what we call a data dictionary, which you'll learn later. And let's just call it contents. And so this is now a position in a data structure, and that position is referenced by the key contents. And the system just says, you know what, no problem. I'll go ahead and set it up for you, and you can now use it. And we want to say, in that position, we want to do some stuff. And what do we want to do? We're going to dynamically build some SQL so that we can print it out to a view. So here's how I could do that. I could say equals viewbag.contents plus, and I'm going to drop it to the next line so you can see it, and we're going to just say let's do a p tag, and then let's print the contents of that array. So we say the array name and then the array number, and then let's go ahead and close off that p tag. And so by the time we're done, this should have a bunch of p tags with the contents from the array. And so now we can go and display that information back to our view. Now we need a view. Remember, the job of the controller is to do all the work for the most part, and the view is talk to the user, display to the user. So as long as my cursor is within this method, I can let ASP.NET help me create the view, because I want my view in most instances to be the name of my index within that controller. So if I right mouse click and just say add view, it grabs the name index, and it did that because that's the name of the method you were in. And then go ahead and leave this checked for right now. We'll understand what that means a little bit later. And actually, let's just uncheck it. We're going to do it all ourselves. And then click add. So this will now go create our view that will be associated with the controller index method that we just worked with. And if you notice over here, look where that view was created. In the view, it made a brand new folder called home. Now why did it do that? Because it took the name of the controller without the word controller and made a folder for it. And then it said, here's the name of the view, index.cshtml. And why did it do that? Because it said, you're in the index method in the home controller. And so we're going to go ahead and call that view index. And now I can come over here to the body and I can display the contents of the view bag, which is just a holding location that we can do anything we want with. So since I loaded up that viewbag.contents with a bunch of HTML right here, remember I just had p tags with the array and a closing p tag, I can now come back over to my view and I did it in the div, you can do it other places. I said @ which says call razor. Razor allows us to execute C# code within an HTML file. And we said use the HTML class, which is a helper for us, use the raw method, and take the contents, we call it contents, we could have called it anything, of the view bag, turn it into a string, and display it. So let's go ahead and run this and see if we see 5 random numbers displayed to the web page. And there they are, 7, 11, 2, 7, and 4. Let's come back to here, and let's go back to our controller. It must have worked because I said viewbag.contents. Okay, I'm going to try viewbag.stuff. I'll just call it stuff. And I'll come back over to here, and we'll say viewbag.stuff. Let's run it again and see, because maybe contents was some reserved word that we need to be careful with. And the viewbag says, I don't care what you call it. As long as you give me a name, I can put stuff into it. And when I say stuff, I can put anything. So that's how you can work with an array in an MVC site, creating a controller and a view. And in our controller, we do all of our work. And then we just load information into the view bag. And we just dynamically wrote HTML and access the contents of the array. And then over in our view, we said, let's go grab the contents of the view bag, make sure it's a string, and pretend that it's HTML code and display it.